There we go. All right. So thank you everybody for joining. I'm sure we'll have a few more popping in here in just a second. It's always kind of tricky towards the end of the day. I know that feeling. So thank you for taking the time to join us here. We're really excited and thrilled to have Hunter with us to talk about some Teams governance and deployment strategies. I know that's a very timely topic for a lot of people, including myself in my current job. So really looking forward to some of the insight and value that Hunter can add to our everyday work. So thank you, Hunter. I'll go ahead and hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Nate. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity. I am going to go ahead. I probably should have already been doing this, but I'm going to go ahead and share out my screen there and then present my deck. Yep, that's fine. There we go. Great. So a little bit about me before I get rolling as an introduction here. My name is Hunter Willis, and you all know that part. I've been at AvePoint for about 4 years, but I'm a lifelong techie, and I've been doing web hosting, SEO, and like social media strategy for nigh on a decade or so before this, but it's all been on the side. So I'm MCSA certified, and I've been in the Power Automate community for quite a while as well. I'm also the president of the Richmond SharePoint user group, so it's cool to be speaking here at the Lawrence, Kansas SharePoint user group across the country there too. And like I said before, I'm also a lifelong techie, so I built my first computer when I was in 6th grade, and my brother is a huge networking nerd. And one of the reasons that I didn't have a career in tech before the past couple of years is that my brother was compiling Unix kernels when he was like 20. So I didn't think I knew anything about IT, even though I could like build websites and, was doing web hosting and all these things, because my brother was compiling Unix kernels when he was 20. So it made me feel like I didn't know a whole lot, which is really funny. But yeah, so I still learn from him all the time, even though we're both adults now. And there's a lot of people in this community that I've learned from that have taken time to invest in me, and Nate is one of those people. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and do this today. So let me see here. Great. Just getting my information together here. So today, I want to talk about we're going to talk about the modern workplace today just a little bit. And Jenny, we can also ask you some questions about like where your organization is with Teams, and Nate, you as well, if you guys want to contribute to that, or maybe even other people that you've talked to in the industry, so we can get some context. And I'd like to try to keep this conversational, especially because it's like a smaller, more intimate group. It's really nice to kind of have a little bit of back and forth and understand the audience a little bit more. But we'll be going over why, and again, touching kind of high points of why a lot of organizations are using Microsoft Teams, and then getting into being able to ensure sustainable adoption, right, through different strategies and different resources that exist from Microsoft. And also, the things that we're going over today, the beauty of this is, even though Teams is a relatively new solution for a lot of organizations, it has been around for a little while. And a great example, there's a fantastic example of Microsoft actually doing their own deployment, and they actually made a video and a series and all these different things, so you can actually learn from what they went through when they did their deployment of Teams, because they learned a lot of those lessons themselves as they began to adopt the solution internally too. So the point is that you're not alone if you're having these pain points of adopting Teams and getting into it, or if you haven't gotten there yet, or even interested in just kind of taking a look at it, this will help you strategize for a future implementation of Teams, and it's really great to be ahead of that curve. So talking about the modern workplace today, there are a lot of diverse roles. It's not like kind of in a traditional workforce. Everybody used to be a lot more siloed, a lot more independent working, and another thing is that people's roles used to be a lot more easily defined. And what this is kind of showing, right, we're getting a little bit of overlap, right? I don't think I've talked to anybody as an adult nowadays that feels like the job description they were given by their manager is exactly what they do all day long, right? It's just not the case anymore. People are being forced to adapt to changing landscapes. The needs of organizations change over time, and sometimes very, very quickly. And it forces staff and the people working in different roles to be able to adapt to that changing landscape, which means that The way that different types of workers across an organization interact changes, and the strategies they use to communicate need to change to be able to meet that. So people collaborate a whole lot more. They talk a lot more. They email a lot more. They're chatting a lot more. They share documents more. There are internal, external, and remote needs that go along with this, right? As people are trying to interact with their customer, learn more with their customers, that interaction isn't, again, it's not so siloed. It's not just like we're reading reports and talking to people within our departments, and then maybe we talk to a customer every now and again. It's all kind of mixed in together. By 2025, millennials will account for over 75% of workers. Okay, so they are much more open in a collaborative sense. They look for less structure. Younger workers, et cetera, are kind of generally with that mind frame, and they're also used to, things being readily available, quickly on demand, and with a high engagement level. So the point here is that there's a diverse workforce. These people that are younger, that are coming into the workforce, are used to the technologies that they've had in their hands, and they're mingling with generations that are used to the old file server, right? Or only accessing things from a desktop computer or a laptop. And so there are different expectations that come along with that, right? People that only want to use email, people that are used to chat platforms and haven't used email much at all. People that know how to use apps and push buttons, as well as people that are used to kind of more old school, tinned form field kind of applications that they've been using in their different organizations. So this is very much a Microsoft slide, but I feel like it really is a very, very true and to the point here. As the industry has changed, many traditional organizations and larger companies feel like it's just kind of hit them. So they are feeling the pains of digital transformation without structure, which means that there's documents everywhere. There's kind of ad hoc collaboration processes happening all over the place. There are different applications that come in there, even though an organization may say, hey, we want to use SharePoint and Office on premises to do our collaboration. Everybody wait for the cloud. That may not be okay with their workers, right? Who want to use things like Dropbox, Slack, Google Docs, G Drive, right? Other applications to collaborate faster because they know how to do that. It's easier for them, it's fast, and it works. And a lot of times they're not even aware they shouldn't be doing this, because the only way the organization communicates that to them is in their employee handbook. And the handbook says down on line 5,322, hey, you're not supposed to use these external forms of collaboration. Everything needs to be in the SharePoint document library. And half the time when employees read that, they don't really care that much about it, right? It's like, well, look, this is the easy way to do things. We're more productive with it. A lot of times it's free if we're not using a paid version, right? They have the freemium versions. You can just sign up online, share a file. Why should I use that old file server? So that's kind of the point of all of this, right? That's the digital transformation. And to get everybody on the same page, that's why organizations are moving to Office 365. It's a way to make it so that it's not such a hard process to, like, you don't have to log into a VPN and pop onto a server in order to access basic information and collaborate with your teammates, right? You can just open a phone app, the Teams app, for instance, counts as one of the quick wins we'll talk about here in a little bit. But it's a really easy way to just pop onto your phone, collaborate right there. You can talk to people, and it kind of takes the stress out of it too. Things like emojis and smiley faces and stuff like that, and different contextual links that you can put in there kind of lighten the communication there. And the fast pace of chat also means you can communicate more quickly and communicate more emotion across at the same time. So this is a good place for us to kind of just stop and say, Nate and Jenny and Hosea, who's on here as well now, maybe Nate, if you want to just start really quick, like, where are the organization that you work in, the different organizations that you've encountered along the way, right? Where do you feel like they are in this process? Do you feel like they're already recognizing the move to Office 365 for the most part and trying to deploy teams successfully? Or do you feel like they're just kind of on the cutting edge of this, really starting to feel the pain points and making that decision to transfer to the cloud?
I think for me, so I have a background in healthcare, education, and corporate realms. And when I was in the education industry, it felt like O365 was just a standard thing. And I think that was really helped because students, have O365 and they're using the latest things and they're familiar with Slack already from their outside engagements and different things that they work on and do in the community. So Office 365 seems like a natural move for universities to stay relevant and competitive and cut down on some of those things like your slide says with shadow IT. But ever since I was in that world, I moved into healthcare and the corporate world, and those kind of vary. So I think, if you're on-prem and you have so much content that can be difficult to handle on servers, it can be a little bit trickier to get, everybody moved to O365 at once. And it's definitely a process, and it definitely requires the structure that you're talking about.
Sure. Sure. And that's one of the reasons that those kinds of organizations are a little bit slower to move to the cloud, right? We've got a file server that's got, tens of thousands, sometimes even millions of people's PII on there, and it's not super structured, and a lot of times people don't even know what's on there, right, before they move. So, Jenny or Jose, do you guys want to pop in and talk about where you all are as far as like digital transformation and the cloud journey goes?
I'll comment.
Okay.
I'm in a government research organisation, and I guess we're probably a little bit of a mix of that academic and corporate concern, in that we've got quite a mature on-premise environment of all of the wonderful things that you've mentioned, but we also have a little bit of that underground IT solutions happening, and also a huge desire to collaborate more effectively externally with partners. And so moving to the cloud is a natural progression to enable that more easily. And so we've made the decision to definitely move to the 365 platform, but we are at the point where we're trying to develop a roadmap to know how we're going to phase it, and what components of that periodic table we will take on, and how we're going to move people along on that change journey. We have a bit of a aging workforce in our organisation, so
Sure.
That's a consideration for us. Yeah, that's where we're at.
And that goes back to the previous topic there, right? That the diverse workforce, the people that are kind of like on their way out or close to retirement, well, working alongside younger folks that are coming in, and there's kind of this conflict of, how people should be collaborating or understanding what's going on. Jose, and you don't have to. Don't mean to put you on the spot. You're welcome to speak up now. I'll stay for a second. If you just want to stay muted, that's totally fine too.
Oh, yeah. So, we're kind of in the beginning stages. It's Jose Townsend, and I kind of work in the legal industry, law firm. And so we're starting to move over into the cloud, but not quite yet. So most of our stuff is on-prem. So I'm just, joining it to kind of get some more information.
Perfect. All right. That's great. That's great. So when it comes to Office 365, especially for organizations with like an older workforce or organizations that are not so familiar with the cloud at the beginning of that, right? Office 365 and moving to cloud platforms can be kind of intimidating, because there a lot of times, especially with also with heavily regulated organizations, it's a very they're used to a very structured environment where they're supposed to go here and do X, Y, and Z, and not really supposed to think outside of the box much. Even though a lot of times a lot of people still do outside of the box things, again, like using shadow IT, like Slack, Dropbox, Google Docs, or sometimes even there's kind of this mix IT where like a department will be like, well, we want to use G Suite. So a manager or somebody will like buy G Suite licenses for part of their team, but it's not official from IT. And, so there can be a lot of times in a migration project, we used to talk about migration like, okay, well, you got to figure out, what's on your SharePoint servers, what's on your file servers, any other app servers, and look through that. But now it's also like, you got to kind of talk to your departments and ask your managers, and even down to the individual teams of workers, like, are you guys using Dropbox? Like, is there stuff in other places? So you got to say, like, it's always good to say this isn't to try to get people in trouble. We just need to know so that we can start answering those use cases, right? Find good ways to transition those workflows into Office 365. But along with that comes this ability to kind of translate Office 365 to other people. Like, how are we going to use all these different applications? Because when you get to the cloud, there's tons and tons of applications in Office 365. And most people are still just using their email and OneDrive, or if they're, if organizations have decided to go ahead and start using Teams, a lot of times they'll pop in and really utilize that chat functionality and a little bit of the Teams functionality. But there's still other things like the Power Platform, right? In Office 365, or like deep diving into like using SharePoint and building sites and utilizing lists and libraries to handle workflows. And some of you may be thinking, I don't really know what he's talking about right now, right? if you're not super familiar with the platform, but it's just to say that understanding the context of how those apps can work together is super important. So when we look at the teamwork in Microsoft 365 / Office 365, to explain the difference really quick, especially since we have people that are just kind of getting into all of this, the difference between Microsoft 365 and Office 365. Microsoft 365 is Office 365, but you also get a Windows license for every license that you buy, right? So you're not just subscribing to the Office licenses, but you're also getting a subscription Windows professional license that you can use for a desktop device, right? So that's an added benefit. It's a great value, and it is what Microsoft is really pushing as a value over just Office 365. They want us to be using like hashtag Microsoft 365, and it makes sense, right? And it's a good value for organizations. So when we look at the applications in Office 365, to match the way that people collaborate, this is essentially a unofficial suggestion from Microsoft about how people really can use these apps to efficiently collaborate in Office 365. So the outer loop here, we have Yammer, right, which is kind of like a early social media platform like Facebook, where there is a content stream of information and people can post content inside of Yammer groups. So there's basically like a feed that happens, and it's not chat based, right? But it is really easy to do searches for text information, as well as people can drop pictures and announcements, right? You can give people accolades and things like that on there. So it's a really good platform for knowledge dissemination. At AvePoint, we use this as kind of our Q&A area as well as an announcement area. So we encourage people to go in there and ask questions organization-wide so that when they're answered, number one, those questions are super visible across the organization. And a lot of people can see not only that the question was asked, but also when the answer comes, right, it's forever recorded in that Yammer instance so that we can always search for it. If people search for the same topic, there's the question, there's the answer. Hey, this is great. As kind of a Q&A database, it's a little less formal and fun to use. But also, you can use things like Stream to do video and live events, and you can distribute it through Teams and Outlook. But through Yammer, you can actually live stream the event right from the feed. So you can do like an organization-wide announcement in Yammer and do that. Now, it's important to note that you also have still Outlook, right, is a recommended way to communicate via email, but it's kind of changing the way that we use email. Email in the past has been for just about every single kind of communication you can think of, but as chat platforms have become the norm for just really quick back and forth communication, and people have also, as there's been more communication, been feeling the pain of having, an email that has like 10 previous emails stacked there. So in order to find the information or even understand the email conversation that happened, you kind of have to like drop down everything and sort up and down and figure things out, right? So email, though, is still a really good way to send like a formal communication to someone, especially if they're external for back and forth. If you're sending detailed information or structured information to external clients and you want to have a really nice formal face to it, email is still a really great way to make that happen. But also for internal, right? There are certain messages that are nice as an email as opposed to just like a chat, especially if you're sending them out to many people. And then your inner loop, Teams, okay? And one of the nice things about Teams, though, is that primarily you're using Teams for this back and forth chats, which, yes, we can call our inner loop for you and, 500 of your best friends, as we say. But you can segment out the information. You can segment out and name the individual chats that you have. And then you also have the actual team structure themselves, where you have the team is linked to the group and the SharePoint site and other applications in Office 365. And we'll kind of visualize that here in a minute. It's to say, though, that one of the other great things about Teams is that you can send an email such that it will show up in a Teams channel, for instance. You can embed a Yammer group into a Teams tab inside of Teams. So one of the reasons that Teams is so great is that it's not just that inner loop. It's not just that chat back and forth. It is that, and that's its primary function. but it's also taking all of these other things that already exist and are great in Office 365, and it's giving you one interface. So you don't have to do what those of us who are, from the early days of Office 365 and even the past, 5-6 years of it, used to doing, and that is having 10 or 15 tabs open on your web browser to be able to continuously manage the different applications that you're using in Office 365. Teams gives a much smoother experience as far as navigating that information, but also associating it with chat information and keeping all of that structured and organized, and most importantly, especially for end users, easy to find, right? I can go to the search, I can search for my chats, I can search for my files, I can search for information that's been put into Teams. Any questions on that before we move on? All right. So I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit, and I'm kind of determining what kind of content I want to focus on, because I had some more, a little bit more in-depth focused content. But I think what I'm going to do, since you guys are both kind of in the initial to moderate phases of implementing Teams for your organizations, is keep it a little bit more high level and talk more about the strategy. I will still go over some of the technical stuff here, but I think it would be more helpful to talk about the strategy, show the application a little bit, and kind of go that route. So Teams, as opposed to Skype, which was seen as just like a back and forth chat collaboration platform, Teams is, Microsoft loves using the phrase, it's the hub for teamwork, right? We're taking all the different things that are in Office 365, most of the different applications that are in Office 365, and we're cramming them together into one great interface. And both of you being on Teams for this meeting right now, you obviously see, right? It can be really easy to use. It's easy to pop into as far as one-to-one meetings or multiple meetings, or even hosting a user group webinar, right? But you can also integrate that SharePoint information. You have Planner there for scheduling meetings and tasks and keeping track of who needs to do what and when. And there is, most importantly, for like traditional IT, right, there's a lot of governance and security controls on the back end, including the same great capabilities that have always been available in SharePoint for the files that are dropped into Teams, because behind every team is a SharePoint site where all those files live. And again, we'll dive into that here in just a few minutes. So there are channel tabs, there's chat bots, there's one-to-one chats, there's communication chats under the Teams, which gives a security structure to Teams, which really allows you to label chat communication and keep a little bit more granular control of who has access to what, especially when it comes to actually back and forth chats, especially now with private channels, which I'll show in just a few minutes too. There's even more granular control for that. Now, Teams, Microsoft has a lot of suggestions around this for best practices, etc. But Teams can be built out for different departments, and different departments typically have different ways they like to use Teams. But these are mostly suggestions, right? A lot of times marketing will use Teams to like manage their events and manage the leads that come in, have a lot of quick back and forth conversations with that, be able to share news across the organization and disseminate information internally as well. But also you can do things like connect to YouTube and embed websites and things like that, so you can see that information. Especially handy for marketing at events, right? When you're having to chat back and forth, the Teams app really makes it easier to let people know where you are, what's going on, take pictures, share them, and those kinds of things. Sales communicates back and forth. Our sales organization has the different regions as teams, and then every single person inside the team has their own channel where they're keeping track of the different organizations that they work with and what the status is. And also they can @mention people to get help and answer questions in there for the more specific things that shouldn't really go into Yammer, right? For everybody to see, maybe something about costs or contracts and things like that need to go in there. HR can make those kinds of announcements. Here at AppPoint, we also have like teams for every office, for office events and things like that too. So a lot of different ways that it can be used by different departments, especially because you're integrating so many things in there, right? So the basic structure of the team as far as the chat goes and the integrations to it, the team is basically the container for the structure of the content within it, right? So the team is kind of the highest level, and you can have multiple teams in your organization. And then there are channels that are, like in the SharePoint world, we would call a channel kind of like a subsite, right, for the team. Now, each channel literally has a subfolder of the shared documents library at the SharePoint site behind the team. That was a mouthful to say, but it's true. And the tabs in each channel contain the conversations and the files, and then there's information for like the wiki page and the notebook that can go along in each channel, and I'll visualize that here in just a minute as well. I keep saying that. I'll see it in just a minute. But we're going to go into like, I'll demo it all here in just a minute, kind of show you how this all works together. But it's important to note that those files, again, are in SharePoints. Now, if you have the connectors turned on, one of the super powerful things about Teams is that these tabs can also be connectors to just about anything that you can put in via the web, right? You can connect a website to it. You can connect internal applications to it. You can connect external applications to each channel within the team so that people can interact with that data. You can, like if people are using G Suite and you're not done with the migration for that yet, you can actually go to the Files tab in the channel behind the team and connect it to a G Drive so that you can see the files in G Drive right in Teams. And it's just a connector that's made you be able to do that. The files aren't actually in Office 365 necessarily, right? So a lot of capabilities when it comes to that. Now, that was not what I clicked on. Come on, buddy. There we go. Conversation. Thanks, PowerPoint. Here we go. All right. Conversations are at the heart of team collaboration. The app mentions being able to drop files, have links. You can see what the tabs look like here at the top of this. This is actually one of our internal teams. We have, under our U.S. public sector team, we've got knowledge, marketing events, right, for all the people under that team to be able to collaborate, keep track of what's going on. And then you can see we have App Point University here, lunch and learn plans, right, different resources. And then as you get more and more tabs, there's a drop down here. But these are different resources, right, that have been dropped into our U.S. public sector team to help them collaborate. So there's a lot of structure here, but at the same time, it makes it a lot easier for everybody to understand what's going on, and it's all visualized within one pane. You don't have to sit there and click a million different places to really see what's happening or know where you need to go to find what. So the channels, the Teams channel tab, these are the elements that we've been talking about, right? As we drop in here, as we said, the channels for each team has a folder inside the documents library of the SharePoint site behind the team. So, boom. So this is a live Teams environment right here. And to give you another idea of like how things are broken out, this is a Microsoft demo environment, right? So this is basically like Microsoft's suggestion of what Teams should look like in an environment. So here we have like an HR leadership team, for instance. And then the subjects underneath that are the channels here. So they've got a general one, they've got an events one, and presumably this is all for like planning and the HR leadership responsibilities. But then here we've got like a more general team, like a Contoso finance team for the Contoso company, which is like their demo company, right? There's audits, budget analysis, and the information under here, and you can see people are collaborating, right? They're sharing information about what's going on. It's easy to @mention people. You can add subjects to topics and things like that. And then if we look up here, there's a whole lot of integrations here. There are private channels here as well, where I can actually control the membership of who can be in the team, and in the private channel. So within the team, this is the commercial lending team here. There's a commercial interactions private channel. Now you can also pin individual channels, right? You can see here, just in this demo environment, I've got all these different teams and tons of channels in here, but I've got a couple of channels that I actually want to show you and use for this demo. So I pinned them up at the top of Teams here. And I've done that so that it's easy for me to access and see the ones that I need for the very demonstration that I'm doing right now. You can do the same thing in chat, though. When you're chatting with different people, you can pin those chats. So you can have maybe the people that you most frequently contact or the most important ones can be pinned there, so you don't have to do searches or kind of search around the environment for them. Now, when we go to a budget analysis, what I want to show you in here is a beautiful example of the power of Power BI and the Power Platform, right? So here I've got Power BI integrated into a Teams channel, and it's interactive, right? I have all the capabilities of Power BI in here. I can click on the data, separate it out, see what relates to what, and how those relationships build out if I have a Power BI license available within E5. And, if you used the Power BI desktop for free, I might always make the suggestion that you could still take screenshots or even put the Power BI file into the team so people could download it, right? So there's other ways to visualize this if you don't have E5 or can't afford E5 licenses across your organizations. But this just looks so nice, and it's a really simple, easy way to interact with that information. Now, even if you're a little more old school, you can still embed a Excel document in here, right? So it's really easy for people to see the information that they need and interact with it. It's not just visual here, right? I can actually select this data and edit it right from within the tab, okay? So really important, really easy stuff to set up here. To add a new tab, I just click the click button there and can add a tab for buttons here, okay? And another thing I can do is add things like a SharePoint list, right? Or a form that's been connected to a SharePoint list. So it's really simple and easy for me to get data entry that goes right into SharePoint on the back end in Office 365. So here with a private channel, getting back to that, I can see that the private channel itself has members and owners. Okay, so other people in the team cannot see the members or owners of the private channel. The owners of the team can see the some of the information inside of the private channel, but not all of it, right? And they can't necessarily make changes if they're not an owner of the private channel. Okay, but they can see like the members and owners of the private channel. Now, the private channel, when I create a private channel, it also gets a new SharePoint site. So the SharePoint site for the private channel is not the same SharePoint site as the one behind the team. It's its own SharePoint site that is its own document library. And you can see here, it does not have the same, if we go to the commercial lending, it doesn't have the folders for all the other channels in that team. It just has the one folder because this is the SharePoint site solely for the private channel within the commercial lending team here, okay? So really important to understand. And we'll come up with the, there are, when it comes to strategy and how people are using teams, one of the reasons I'm spending so much time talking about the structure of this and the integrations is that as organizations are implementing or coming up with a strategy to govern teams, these are things that are vitally important for the consideration of how they're going to govern them, right? How are you going to recommend that users build out their teams if you're letting them do that? Or are you as IT members going to be the only people that can provision teams? And if so, are you going to have set structures for them? And if so, what are they going to be? Or are you just going to let people have their team and do whatever they want to within those, right? We strongly recommend, though, at least a guidance for use for this, right? And as you can see, I've been in a lot of customer tenants and seen their structures, and there's also a lot of, you can see here from the different examples that Microsoft has, there's typically set teams for different departments that are going on within the organization. But then especially for like larger or long-term projects, they may have individual teams for those as well. But things like naming conventions for those kinds of teams and managing the life cycle of project-based teams are definitely things that you're going to want to consider how you're going to handle that, right? And again, we'll dive into a little bit of that here. When it comes to that governance, we typically talk about this in terms of needing to govern the provisioning, the management, and the life cycle of teams. When I say provisioning, determining who's going to have the ability to create the team, or even just for groups in SharePoint, this is not a bad idea and can really apply to all the workspaces in Office 365. But understanding how they're requested, approved, and created, right? Is every single request going to go from IT? If not, are there people that you can trust inside the organization to follow the rules? And who are those people? Or maybe if you're not concerned with them following the rules, do you have authority over them, right? Or a stakeholder that has authority over those users? And then once they are provisioned, you need to have a way to continually monitor and manage the workspaces that have been created, because just because something is provisioned perfectly and all set up doesn't mean that, the next day the person that got the team that may be an owner of the team isn't going to add a bunch of other owners, start changing settings, right? If you've got external sharing turned on for your tenant, start sharing information out and change settings within the team alongside of that. So to avoid those kinds of situations, or at least have an understanding of what's going on inside your tenant, you do need to be able to plan to review that information and potentially make changes to it as time goes on based on policies, right? And then lastly, of course, focusing on the life cycle. And anybody that has worked for, you all on this call right now have worked with, highly regulated organizations, government organizations. So you understand there's also like retention policies and reporting policies that are very, very important that come along with life cycle, right? Do I need to hold on information for 5 years, for 7 years? And then especially for private regulated industry, as soon as that 5 to 7 year period is up, we need to delete it immediately so that we're not subject to discovery for it. So how do you keep track of that in your tenant? And there are a lot of tools in Office 365 to take care of those things, but in order for them to work properly, you need to have a way. Again, it goes back to provisioning, right? You need to have a way to make sure that there are naming conventions, that there are proper policies and properties applied to those groups and teams as they are provisioned. Because if you don't set it up right from the get-go, it doesn't really matter how much you're doing in Office 365 to apply policies to it and to govern it. If the properties don't match the content, then you're not actually doing what you need to anymore. And in the old days, these kinds of things were, it was a little iffy, but it was kind of acceptable. But nowadays, it's not anymore at all. In fact, it's much more stringent and quite the opposite. If your governance policies and retention policies aren't applied properly to the content that they need to be, there's even there are more and more increasingly stringent rules on these things and more liability associated with them. So it's super important to understand and focus on that. So typically there's a couple of different ways to do this natively, right? You can apply restricting self-service for creation to certain groups of organization members, and you can change visibility, right? You can have public and private groups. You can control groups and teams by dynamic membership. There's also different kinds of groups and teams that you can have, like organization-wide groups / teams, and teams that have dynamic membership, where there's, basically you're applying sets of users to be members of a team if they have certain properties. But some of these, like a group-wide team, and actually I can't remember what the number of user restrictions are for dynamic membership, but I believe that both of those are restricted to 5,000 users. So if you have an organization that are 5,000 users or more, you may not be able to take advantage of those features. But there's still a lot of other things that you can do. So when we typically see like teams initially rolled out in a lot of organizations, they do an organic onboard. They just kind of like let the users do what they're going to do. But a lot of times this very quickly winds up in a lot of sprawl in the organization, where there's like tons of teams all over the place, and then IT kind of turns it off, goes back, tries to clean it up and organize it, and then does another release of teams. And we've seen this over and over again. But having the IT team just control everything and not let the users do anything is also not really an ideal solution. So you don't really want to go to either extreme. It's usually good to pick, determine some criteria for users that can be able to provision teams, and you have the ability to create a security group of those users, right, where you're limiting who can create the groups or teams in the organization. And then make sure those users have the appropriate training and understand the consequences for the responsibility they've been getting, right? And also make them understand why, and don't just train them and deploy things, but as time goes on, and one of the things that's going on here as we're getting away from like server-based platforms and moving to the cloud, you're not just getting rid of servers, right? You're getting rid of the responsibilities, right? And the organization's getting ROI out of this by not having to have people maintain servers, networks, and those kinds of things because you're moving to the cloud. And yay, that's great. But you're also moving to the cloud, right? And the shift is that your users are going to need a lot more attention because there's more things open to them. There's a lot more options to them now. There's more things they need to understand. And in order for IT to properly maintain their environment, there's going to be a lot of ongoing training that's going to need to happen with this, because you're not just deploying an application and using it for a decade anymore, right? you're deploying an application that has all these integrations that can do all these different things in different ways. And it's important that users have a context around this and understand how to interact with the applications that they need to in the ways that they need to in order for that to be successful. So without self-service, right, they won't be able to create a team necessarily. You can be invited to join a team with a code if you don't have self-service, but they won't necessarily be able to create a team if you turn that off, right? But then again, you can have a security group of people, and for them, the people that are in the security group that can provision groups or teams, they will be able to take advantage of that. Now, you also have private or public teams where you can have basically like public teams are visible to the entire organization. People can search for the information within them, and there's very lax criteria for them to be able to join a team. They pretty much can just join it themselves, or anybody in the team can let them in, right? If it's a private team, though, an owner has to let them into the team in order for them to be able to see the content inside of the team, unless it's shared granularly from the SharePoint site behind the team. So you're not just having to worry about what's going on in Teams in here, you're still having to worry about SharePoint permissions and the activities in SharePoint behind the teams, right? So do keep that in mind. Now, the classification that's available to teams, there is a classification beyond the public, private, or org-wide team. But that primarily is just to give users an understanding of the kind of content that should be in that team. There are properties that can be applied to groups and teams, though, and you can get reporting and apply settings via those properties as well. If you have an AAD premium license, you also can apply like naming conventions to teams. And with an enterprise license of Office 365, there are some lifecycle capabilities as well. So bear with me here just a second. I think that with the time that we've got, most of the technical stuff I have is just around that that classification and things like that. And I'm not going to dive into like PowerShell or anything right now, but I would suggest for those capabilities as well as governance, right? You absolutely with a like an E3/E5 license in Office 365. There's a lot of capabilities around being able to go and applying lifecycle settings down to the team's channel level. They're getting ready to release some more security DLP for the private channels and teams is in the roadmap coming very soon as well. So you can apply like DLP and reporting as well as apply legal holds to the information in teams via the channels, which is important to understand as well. So all of that is available in the data governance section in the Office 365 Security and Compliance Center, which actually, instead of just talking about it, I'm going to go into the, let's see here. I think that, you know what? I don't have the admin center open. I'm not going to dive into that right this second. So a lot of documentation around that, though. It's really easy to search with a Google search. Just if you just type in Teams data governance and Teams in the Security and Compliance Center, Microsoft documentation is available. And I'll put some links to that in this deck before I publish it, too, so you have a direct link to it. So one of the more important things with Teams, though, touching on what I was transitioning with before, is this need to drive sustainable adoption, because what you don't want to do is have a deployment of Teams with all of its integrations and all of the data and collaboration that can come along with that very quickly as people adopt Teams, because typically the problem with adoption with Teams is not that people aren't using it. Typically what we see is they use it too much, right? They start to feel the chat capabilities, and they start to see how easy it is to integrate other applications with it, and they want to start using things like Planner and the chat capabilities in Teams and the Files tab and things like this. So, and they like the way that works, especially with the mobile apps that exist in Teams. But there are over 20 ways to create a team. So any of the applications that you spin up just about in Office 365, create a team or a group behind the team. So it's really important that you, here we go. that you understand. Again, that goes back to kind of the provisioning and the management of teams, right? How important that is. Because with that over adoption and with that ability to create a team or a group in so many different ways, you can see an explosion of teams and groups in the environment. And this isn't necessarily bad from an end user perspective, except that it becomes harder to find information because you get teams with, naming conventions that aren't aligned to the organization. So you have things like, executive team that is conflicting with the executive team outlet distribution group, for instance. Or you wind up with the multiple teams with very similar names or contextual names that have the same content, and people are searching for it and they're not really sure what to find. And that can be because, hey, you know what? I needed a planner and I went ahead and created a planner board and named it Nate's Planner Board. But there was already a SharePoint site named Nate's SharePoint site, and I want to collaborate with Nate, and I'm not really sure which one of those two things I should be using, when the reality is that with teams and groups now, if there's anything called Nate's, right, I should be able to collaborate with him via the team and integrate these other applications with it. So just in this example, right, I'm winding up with a SharePoint site and a planner on top of a team in an Office 365 group, and I've created two different teams. And potentially, if I collaborate for more than a day or two, right, I could have many different documents in two different teams. And when that happens across an entire organization, we've literally seen adoption groups and test groups where they've got 50 people in a test group, and they wind up with over 600 teams in like less than a month, right, just by playing with the application. So it's, that's not necessarily to say it's not the application's fault, right? It's just that it's really important to get people to understand that they need to search for what they need before they just start creating teams. Or again, very importantly, just having a team plan for how these are going. I've said teams so much, my mind is just firing off teams. Just having a plan around how these things are going to be deployed as the rollout happens. Okay, so with that, it needs to be really easy for users to do the right thing. Again, the plan needs to be balanced. It can't just be like, hey, in order to do anything in Office 365, you've got to talk to IT first and wait till we get to what you need, right? Maybe having a couple of different groups of people in the organization that can deploy teams for different reasons could really assist that. And this is not a new concept, right? It's just a new way of delegating administration in Office 365. But again, there's always been content owners that need to have a certain part in how they're interacting with applications. But being more contextual with teams and specifying the rules of how they need to interact with teams and getting them to understand why, especially with this younger generation that's coming in. There's a lot of people that have used a cell phone and think that they're tech geniuses now because they can, use the phone apps, but they need to be brought in as stakeholders into this process. A quicker way of saying this is they need to understand what's in it for them, because if they don't get the why, then they're not going to obey the rules, right? And when you explain to them the liability that goes along with this and how it can be easier for everybody in the organization, things are organized so that people know where to find things and how to find things, then it starts to click lights a little bit. So the training on how they're supposed to do their jobs, though, a really good implementation. This is really hard for IT to do, and I always get laughs when I say this, right? But as contextual as you can possibly get. Sometimes some organizations go down to the individual user level. But this is the first point where I slide in there, that there are organizations where their users love their IT, and most IT people don't believe that. But there are organizations that have done this really, really successfully, and their users are, I've heard this from users, and I've talked to people that work for the organizations that I have in my mind right now, but unfortunately I can't say specifically in publicly, that do love it. They love the way things have been rolled out. Things were handled smoothly. This usually involves like a third-party stakeholder, like somebody from marketing, for instance, getting involved and being a translator between IT and end users. Microsoft recommends community groups with stakeholders, right? And I've got a little bit more information on that here as well. Getting onto that, right? Stakeholders, getting buy-in before you start your deployment, understanding that in order to successfully do this, people are going to need to adhere to these business processes using these applications. And the only way to get the end users to do this is to get their bosses to buy into it. And that means, that doesn't just mean, the fast way of saying this is you need leadership buy-in. But I have seen entire seminars just on how to make that happen, right? And the answer is not simply, oh, well, just go tell them the benefits, right? And they'll get it. I've said this so much this week. I was just at Ignite the Tour, and I must have told this to 50 or 100 people. I'm telling you, it is, IT people are psychologists, they're salespeople, they're financial people, all crammed into one, because you've got to listen to your end users, you've got to listen to the people in the organization that are complaining, and at the same time, you've got to be able to pitch the need for the solutions to those stakeholders. And it involves much more than being a good salesperson. You've got to have those relationships, right? It's about pizza parties. It's about buying people cups of coffee. It's about gritting your teeth and being nice with people that you may have had, professional battles with here and there, kind of a thing. And it's really, really hard for a lot of people, and this, especially for people in IT, where, traditionally it's a little bit more isolated from the rest of the organization. But getting that buy-in, getting people to understand what's trying to happen, most importantly for the whole industry, right? Getting the stakeholders to understand that we're not just a write-off and an expense for the organization that has to happen. We actually can increase productivity for everybody if they believe in this, right? And if you can sell them on this. So, building those relationships, getting people to understand contextually for the different departments, getting into the business processes for engineering departments, operations, right, accounting, finance, administration, different areas of the organization, and then also showing them, of course, contextually how the application can work for the business processes that they're trying to accomplish, and then ensuring quick wins, right? Giving people something they can sink in their teeth into, not just trying to explain to them what's in it for them, but actually showing it to them. And the best examples of this are the mobility, right? For Teams, the application, the phone app is really, really great for Teams. But also the meetings application, right? The ability to have virtual meetings on Teams, much better than Skype used to be, and much better than a lot of the other applications that are out there on the market. The video is clear. You can do like background blurs. The ability to have actually like an image in the background is coming as well. But also forming community groups, right? Microsoft has a champions resources section on their website. And there's a really strong example from them from different organizations as well. And we've definitely used this pattern with organizations that we've worked with, but having an internal group of champions where you can get power users, stakeholders, people that are passionate about tech to be on your side, right, as things roll out. And, having one power user in a department that's passionate about what's going on can be worth so many people hours in dealing with IT and applications. If they're the people in their department that know what's going on, that can answer questions for the people around them, and also they can answer some of those contextual training ideas where they're actually showing the people in their department how to do X, how to do Y, how to do Z for their business processes. And for them, they may just be helping people out around them and showing them how to do their job. But for IT and for these applications, they really are doing a lot of the training for us, whether or not we even know that's going on. And so investing in those kinds of people, trying to foster growth in those kinds of people, finding new ones, and having a community of champions where you can receive the feedback, to answer new business cases in the organization, to answer questions from people and empower those power users to answer questions on your behalf, right, in a community for the organization, can be an extremely powerful way to prove that you want to be engaged and also facilitate that engagement. And then establishing a timeline, right, for the deployment where you're going to actually do all these things we've been talking through, right? Identifying use cases, engaging leadership, getting buy-in, developing out some of those contextual business cases, use cases for the department in public sector. They call them missions now, I suppose. And then also, starting that feedback loop, starting that community where you can start kind of showing people what you're planning on implementing and letting them give feedback, and then maybe do a test group, and then getting feedback from that test group, answer the questions, and then continue to develop. But the trick is, and something that's a little bit different now than in the past, is that these applications are updating all of the time. Microsoft, if you look at the roadmap for Office 365, there's tons of new features on the way, and there's going to be more features on the way. There's going to be more applications added to Office 365 as time goes on. It's the nature of the beast now. And having a plan and a strategy to manage as a change management project is no longer what's necessary as a norm, right? This timeline rollout needs to be part of the job, if not someone's job in the organization. It needs to be a group effort, and there needs to be buy-in, because training can no longer be something that happens once a year, once every 2 years as a project, right? Or as a requirement that people have to check off. It's going to need to be an ongoing thing, because Microsoft is going to release applications, and people are going to be clicking in the waffle in Office 365, and the next thing you know, there's going to be a new application there, or they're going to be using Teams, and there's going to be a new feature there, right? And we can't stay on top of everything all of the time, but we can plan for the change that's coming and give expectations for users on where to find resources for the new things that are coming out. So I'm going to point you to my website, which is hunter365.tech. And it's not just a shameless plug of my information and resources, but the main thing I want to point you to is the link right here. You could also just search online for this, or go to the edX website. But I also have a bunch of links on my website right here for these PowerShell resources and a lot of the information that I've covered today, as well as I can put this deck, and there's actually already a version of this deck in this public documents link up here. But you can click these links and get a lot of the links to, like, the PowerShell for Teams, understanding the SharePoint provisioning service that exists there. Teams templates are also available via PowerShell and classifications for Teams. So that's right there. And if you're not already deployed with Teams, you can check out the Teams demo walkthrough that they have publicly available as well. And then for edX, this Microsoft Service Adoption Specialist, it is not it's not really a technical training course. It's really all about change management and deployment, and it comes from a team's perspective. You can see Karuna is on here. She's the product manager for Teams for Microsoft. She's great. I've seen her speak several times, and she's a fantastic speaker, and they're doing a great job over on the team side of things. So she was heavily involved in what was going on with this. There's recordings from the actual internal IT people in Microsoft that talk about how they rolled out Teams internally, the struggles they came across, and how they answered those. And there's even like surveys in here, and there's also surveys. We've got our own independent version of this that we release concurrently with Microsoft, surveys that you can release to the organization from AvePoint as well in this public documents folder here, for as getting that feedback from users about the rollout, how things are going, suggestions that they have, and things like that. But this is the Service Adoption Specialist certification is more like reading a book than it is taking a certification. You're really reading all the content that they've got, which does include a lot of strategy and things like that. And the quizzes are much more about, the competency of the content that you've consumed. But just consuming the content, and even just taking the quizzes, if you want to do that, is free, which is the other reason that I'm bringing this up here. You can pay $99 and get the certificate, but this is a fantastic resource if you are at the beginning of, or even into the middle stages of a Teams deployment and want to learn more about that. I will say that, AvePoint is an organization that does work a lot with Teams governance, strategy, and implementation, and we have resources for that on our website as well, and also have solutions to help with that. But that's all I'm going to say about all of that. So we're rolling right up at the top of the hour here. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present here today. Really appreciate it. And I hope that everybody that joined was able to get something out of it and enjoyed it. And I hope that some people online get to see this as well. Nate, did you have anything else that you wanted to plug in here? And did anybody have any questions for me about any of the content that I covered today?
Hey, thanks so much, Hunter. We don't have any questions that came in, but I'm really grateful for your time. And I know people are going to enjoy watching this recording later. I know it's always hard sometimes during this time frame, and maybe there's some pre-Valentine's Day stuff going on, who knows? But some really great content here, and it was just a blast to get to learn about so many resources that there are that people can do to further their career and really help in their organization's, adoption and governance journey. So I've tweeted out a few of those. I'll show you your slide deck when I get that. And then the recording will also be posted by 7 p.m. Central tonight, so about 2 hours. And then also, if attendees want to save the date for the next meeting, that's March 12th, and it's with Michelle Gilbert of Microsoft.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Hunter. Have a good one. And thanks, everyone, for joining.
All right, thanks. Take care.